Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading of The Wizard and the Frog. Apologies for not uploading last weekend. Excuse me. It was 4th of July weekend, so we were not at home, so I did not have the opportunity to sit down and record the video. So we are back this week, but we are picking up with chapter 3. So I will just jump right into that. Chapter 3, Hooves and Horns. The magical portal pulled and pushed at me, battering me with powerful force. I had the dreadful feeling of falling, the sensation where you feel your stomach leap. I opened my mouth to scream, but if any sound came out, it was lost in the twirling, shifting mass of magic. There was a rushing sound like that of an approaching wind, and then the portal was gone. A jarring stop to the falling sensation, and then I realized I was lying on my back, staring up into the blue sky above. My eyes were slightly disoriented, and my stomach had settled down, but I felt shaky. I risked trying to sit up, and everything seemed to correct itself. I looked over to my right and saw Dormer standing, his eyes turned toward the mountain that loomed in the distance. It drew my attention, too. I'd seen the home of the Minotaurs only once before when I rode with my hunter friends Theo and Breg, the two I was no longer on good terms with. Still, despite seeing the mountain, it was awe-inspiring. The rest of the landscape was flowing fields of green grass and flowers. Standing in the midst of all the greenery was the mountain, an enormous red beast. So, that's where we're headed? Dormerus asked, turning to face me. Yes. I tried to get up, and the elf rushed over to offer me his hand. I took it, pulled myself up onto my feet. Thanks, I said. I checked my pouch and found that Pimeria was still there. Still angry, too, but undamaged. The pendant Master Zalor gave me was on the ground by my feet. I knelt and picked it up, then slipped it into my boot. Now we have to figure out a way to get inside. If they see us, they're likely to kill us on sight without any warnings or questions at all. Have you ever seen a Minotaur before? I asked the elf. Only in books, drawings, and such. Well, forget about what you think you know. They are cruel, viciously strong, and don't care about anything other than their gold. They have built an empire of crime. If we are caught, we can forget about anything we might have wanted to do in this life. And if they don't kill us, they'll force us into slavery. How does that sound? Intimidating, Dormus replied, and not at all how I want my life to end. Good. So what are our options? Magic. Say what now? I asked. I've seen how your spells work, and I can say right now that suggestion should go right into the garbage. Hear me out, Dormer said, ignoring the insult. I can use my illusion to make us look like minotaurs. That'll make it much easier to get inside. Trust me. That's a terrible idea, I said, both his idea and Dormer's expecting me to trust him. If the spell works, we'll look like minotaurs. We'll be able to walk right in instead of sneaking around, Dormus replied. That if is a big problem. What happens when your spell doesn't work and something worse than this happens? I waved my hand at my pouch at Pimeria. Then we're screwed. What's your plan to get inside the base of operations? I assumed Dormerus might ask this question, but I hadn't the slightest clue as how we could get in without being seen. As much as I didn't like it, I was afraid we would have to rely on Dormerus's chaotic magic to get us in. I gave in. Fine. We'll put our lives in your hands. It'll work, Dormerus said. The conviction in his voice was almost enough to sway me to believe him. Every time I thought of Pimeria, I cringed at what might happen. Minotaurs are tough, violent creatures. Even with a band of men, it would be difficult to handle a single one. The fact we were going into an area that had dozens was a death wish. We began the trek towards the mountain. I kept myself focused, checking for lookouts or anything out of the ordinary. So far, so good. Perhaps too good. I decided not to let my mind wander and worry about things I had no control over. We reached the base of the mountain, and I stared up at the imposing wonder. Every rock and crevice was a reddish hue, like the skin of a demon had been tossed over the thing. High above, the dark silhouette of a cave entrance was barely visible. I looked at Dormerus. This was going to be difficult, much more so with the elf potentially causing a disaster. Don't do anything unless I tell you to, I said. No spells, no rough movements. A single loose rock could cause an avalanche, and that's the last thing we need. Got it, Dormerus replied, nodding firmly. It took an hour of climbing to reach the cave that served as the entrance to the Minotaur hideout. A 3-foot ledge extended from the opening, serving as a natural landing of sorts. I pulled myself up over the lip and then reached out to help Dormerus. I brushed the dust off my clothes and looked back in my pouch to make sure Primaria didn't get squished. She was still there, and, of course, still angry. I smiled at her, then closed the pouch. Right, let's get to it then. Start casting, wizard. Dormerus nodded and closed his eyes, then raised his arms up and began whispering in his strange magic language. I could feel a slight tingle against my skin, like the feeling you have when there's a stray hair touching you. It was faint, and the feeling passed quickly. The elf opened his eyes and smiled. It worked, he said excitedly. Judging by your enthusiasm, it seems you doubt even yourself, I said dryly. How do I know it worked? Look at your reflection, Dormerus answered. I drew my blade and held it up before my face. The gruesome visage of a minotaur stared back at me. Wow, I said, watching my beastly mouth move but hearing my voice. That's a ridiculous amount of detail. Dormerus shrugged, but I could see him beaming with pride. He closed his eyes and repeated the spell, and I watched in surprise as the false appearance slowly took shape over him. His minotaur illusion was taller than mine, and his horns were larger too. I sheathed my blade. How do I look? He asked. It'll work, I answered. What about our voices? If we speak, it'll be obvious we aren't who we appear to be. I can't do anything about that, the elf said. We'll have to disguise our voices or not speak at all. That's great. Mute minotaurs. Should I hurl myself off the ledge now or after I push you off? Neither, Dormer said. We can do this. I know it's my fault you are in this mess, but I'm here to help get things right. Yeah, because that life debt spell forces you to be. Even if it didn't, Dormer said, I'd still be here helping you. I didn't say anything. It was his fault, but I was starting to feel bad for insulting him. He was trying to fix his mistake, so I had to give him credit for that. I appreciate it, I finally forced myself to say. Once we're inside, we'll have to navigate these tunnels carefully. From everything I've read, the Triad has all sorts of nasty death traps in here. One wrong decision, and we're dead. Then let's not make any bad decisions, Dormer smiled. Let's go. Daylight is burning. A few feet into the cave, and we were thrown into pitch black darkness. I held my hands out in front of me in case I bumped into anything before my eyes adjusted. Slowly, things began to come into focus. The outline of the cave's walls, the rocky floor, and ahead, the light of torches along the walls. It seemed odd to me that we hadn't encountered any guards yet, but as I considered it, I figured maybe the Triad had enough to their reputation that most would-be thieves didn't want to die and steered clear of the place. They were smarter than us. The tunnel ran for a few hundred feet, then branched off in two directions. I stopped and looked at every detail I could to determine which way might be correct. Left or right? I asked Romers. Right, he answered. I stared at the dusty floor of both channels. The right one seemed to have more dust on the floor, which led me to assume it was much less traveled. We're going left, I announced. To spite me, or... No, look closely at the floor. The left has less dust, and I think I can even see a partial hoof print. This way is traveled more. Dormerus knelt, stared intently for a moment, then rose to his feet. You're right, he said. I would never have thought to look at that. You're a wizard, not a hunter. There are things I've learned over the years. Lack of attention has led too many in my profession dying an early death. That's not surprising, considering you track down monsters. Step carefully. Although this way seems correct, that doesn't mean they don't have traps set up. I stayed in the lead and investigated heavily every few steps. Half an hour in, I knew it was taking too long. We still hadn't seen anyone, but there were sounds of activity beginning to echo into the tunnel. At our current rate of productivity, it was going to take us hours to make any progress. This isn't working, I said softly. Either we'll need to split up or we need to pick up the pace. I think splitting up is a bad idea. So do I. I'll walk faster, but it's going to increase the risk. Just try to help me catch any traps before they kill us, yeah? The tunnel abruptly turned to the right, and we almost collided with the lone minotaur. The creature easily stood over 6 feet tall. Its horns were long and pointed, and it sported a large metal ring in its septum. A harness on its back held a massive battle axe in place. The creature was facing us, but it wasn't paying attention at first. I managed to put a scowl on my face as the beast looked at me. What are you doing? The deep baritone voice spoke. His words echoed throughout the tunnel. I tried to make my best to make my voice deep and rough. All clear down there, I answered. The minotaur looked like it frowned. Who told you to patrol the entrance? I exchanged looks with Dormerus. I was clueless about minotaur names. Thankfully, I didn't have to guess as the creature shook his head. It doesn't matter, he boomed. It was probably that new idiot, Dadak. Do yourselves a favor. Don't listen to that one. He won't be here much longer if he keeps on screwing things up. Got it, I answered. I heard he's a real pain in the hoof. The Minotaur grunted. Yeah, whatever. He turned around. I smiled at Dormerus, and we passed, continued down the tunnel. The sound of voices, laughter, and the occasional scream were becoming commonplace. How long will this illusion last? I asked. I don't know, Dormerus replied. I was beyond hoping that we'd make it out of here alive at this point, so I just nodded and kept walking. There were long stretches of tunnel where we didn't see or hear anyone. At one particular side channel, we almost fell into a pit filled with sharpened steel spikes. I'd missed the fake flooring and nearly tumbled in as it collapsed beneath me. I reached for the wall and scraped my knuckles before catching myself. The dull throb was more annoying than painful. My heart was hammering in my chest now, and I got hot, sweaty. There was just something about dying that really made me nervous. It felt like we had been walking for hours, and we probably had been, but it was impossible to judge the passage of time in here. It would be great if we had some sort of directions to guide us, I complained. Oh, Master Zalor gave me this. Dormerus dug into his pack and withdrew a rolled up parchment. He unfurled it and held it up for me to see. I had to squint in the faint light, but it appeared to be a map. What is it? I asked. It's a map of the tunnels, Dormerus answered. He seemed proud to have it. Are you serious? We've been wandering around in here for who knows how long, and you've had a map the entire time? I was going to kill him. I was definitely going to kill this elf. Sorry, I forgot I had it. I've been focused on keeping this illusion spell going. I thought you didn't know how long it would last. I don't. It depends on how quickly it exhausts me. So far, it's not too taxing. I sighed. Why couldn't anything in my life go right? Just once. Just once I would like for something to go right. I took the map from the elf and read over it, trying to decipher where we might be and where we should go next. There were small X's drawn at random spots, and I began to suspect those were symbols for traps. I stepped out of the side channel and then compared the direction of the main tunnel to the map. I know where we are, I said. Come on, this way. Surprisingly, we're almost there. The map made navigating the tunnels much easier. I still couldn't believe Dormerus could forget he had a map to the place. This guy was a real... Stop! Dormerus's voice suddenly hissed. I paused and looked back at him. What is it? I whispered. He pointed ahead. Along the ceiling of the tunnel, mostly hidden by shadows, were at least a dozen steel-tipped spears. They were pointed toward the floor. I checked the map and confirmed there was no X. This must be new, I said. It's not on the map anywhere. Are we in the right spot? I nodded. Yes, everything else matches. Around the corner should be a door. Inside, we should find the goose. Hope was starting to blossom. Granted, we still had an egg to steal and escape, but we were almost halfway done with this insane quest. It looks like a trap to me, Dormer said. The question is, how does it get set off and how do we get past it? I knelt and studied the floor. There didn't appear to be any tripwires or loose stones that would trigger the spears to fall. Again, nothing that I could see. I'm not sure, I finally said. I can't find any sort of trigger. Whoever designed this is damnably clever. What do we do? I held the map up near a torch and tried to find another way. There wasn't one. I folded the map and handed it to the elf. Looks like this is the only way in. I tightened the straps on my sack and prepared myself mentally to go under a canopy of death. We're going to run through it. Run? Dormerus asked. I could tell by his tone he had the same trepidation I did. Yes, don't let anything slow you down. Ready? No. But if this is the only way, then let's do it. That's the spirit, I said. On 3. 1, 2. Without waiting for 3, Dormerus sprinted forward. I quickly followed after him. My instincts telling me to look up, but I knew that could seal my fate. If I tripped or slowed down, it could be the last thing I ever did. We made it out from under the spears, and I expected a loud clamor. Nothing. I stopped and turned to see the spears were still suspended in place. That seemed odd, but I wasn't going to question our luck. I turned back and saw Dormerus was standing in front of a large door. This is it, I said softly, coming to stand beside him. There's no telling what's on the other side of this door. Dormerus said, it could be a small army, or it could be empty. Only one way to find out, I said. We grabbed onto the steel ring that served as the door handle and pulled with all our might. The door groaned in protest as it slowly opened. As soon as it was cracked enough that we could fit inside, we released the handle. The door stayed quiet. Here we go, I whispered. Drew my sword and stepped inside the doorway. That's when I felt it. A tripwire snapped under the weight of my foot. A few seconds later, the spears dropped from the ceiling and crashed to the floor, and the tunnel reverberated with a loud noise. There wasn't a doubt in my mind that sound was going to alert someone, probably a guard. Several guards. The entire triad. I grabbed Dormerus with my free hand and pulled him into the room with me. The room was illuminated with both torches and a myriad of candles. In the back of this chamber, centered against the wall, was a bulky nest, and in that nest was the largest goose I had ever seen. It was easily as tall as me and as wide as two minotaurs standing side by side. It was clearly overweight. Standing beside the nest was a lone minotaur. He didn't seem to notice us, and the goose looked bored. I let go of Dormerus and held up my blade, prepared to fight off the vicious creature. The minotaur slowly turned his head toward us, but his stance didn't seem threatening. Who's there? He asked. Could he not see us? I advanced slowly, my blade ready to impale the creature through the heart if I saw the faintest movement. Roughly 10 feet away, I realized why the beast didn't seem bothered. Its eyes were covered in a milky white glaze. It was blind. It's just me, I said, disguising my voice. I'm here to collect an egg. You're early, the blind minotaur replied. The goose won't be popping anything out for another few minutes. I know, but Dadak is impatient, the minotaur snorted. Dadak. That bastard's gonna get an axe in his back if he doesn't learn his place. That made two of the creatures we encountered who had a mutual disdain for whoever Dadak was. I made a mental note of that, thinking it might come in handy later. Yeah, well, what can you do? I grunted. The blind minotaur stood silently for a moment, then asked, How did you manage to trip the wire? You've been here plenty of times. My brain scrambled for a response. I didn't seem to have one. It was me, Dormerus answered. I didn't see it. Who are you? The minotaur asked. He's new, I said. One of Dadak's guys. Keep your mouth shut about what I said, the creature threatened. Dadak's gaining a lot of enemies. It'd be best for you if you didn't hold too tightly to your reins of loyalty to him. Noted, Dormerus said. The giant goose stood up and began to shuffle around. She's getting ready, the minotaur announced. The goose twisted its head this way and that, then blinked lazily. A loud thud, then the bird sat down. Go ahead, the minotaur said. I walked up to the nest and eyed the bird warily. Since I didn't know anything about the triad's gold enterprise, I assumed the bird was used to having its eggs taken, but I knew what could happen when one assumed. I stepped into the nest and carefully stepped behind the goose. My eyes widened in shock. The egg was the length of my arm and almost as wide as my chest. When I thought egg, I thought something much smaller. How the hell were we supposed to get this out of here carrying something that huge? I looked at Dormerus and motioned for him to help me. I'm going to have the new guy take this one, I said. The minotaur shrugged. Dormerus climbed into the nest and I lowered my voice. Look at this. It's huge. How are we going to get this thing out of here? How heavy is it? I don't know. Considering it's made of gold, I'm going to guess pretty heavy. Dormerus grabbed the egg by the sides and heaved. He was able to lift it with a little difficulty. It's not too bad, he grunted. It's not light, but it's not as heavy as I expected either. Well, we still have to find a way to get out of here without being noticed. Carrying a huge egg isn't exactly subtle. What's taking you so long? The blind minotaur asked. Sorry, he answered. New guy here is having some trouble. Figures, the minotaur muttered. Dadak attracts the idiots. Screw it, I said to Dormerus. We'll just take it and get out of here as quickly as possible. We don't have to stand here trying to figure things out. We don't have time to stand here trying to figure things out. I'm surprised guards haven't come to check out the noise yet. As if jinxing myself, two hulking minotaurs stepped into the chamber, weapons drawn. Gods above, I cursed. What? Dormerus looked over his shoulder. Oh, crap. You there, one of them shouted, pointing at us. Halt! And that's the end of chapter 3. So next week, be back with chapter 4. So no holidays or anything coming up. So nothing to cause me to miss the next one. So remember, if you're not subscribed, you're just stumbling upon this video, make sure to hit subscribe. Check out my audiobooks on here and do weekly readings of books that are not in audio format. So thank you for listening and see you next week.